Welcome to this week's edition of Outdoors Online, a weekly webcast produced by the North Dakota Game and Fish Department. I'm your host, Mike Anderson. My guest this week is Chad Parent. Chad's in charge of all the surveys here at the Game and Fish Department. Chad, why are we surveying hunters?
Well, the short answer, Mike, is that we send out surveys so that we can count how many animals were harvested. And I know that seems obvious, but to put that into perspective, I think we need to talk a little bit about some nerdy stuff, wildlife ecology as it relates to hunting. And there's this idea in ecology that for any given area, you can harvest sustainably some level of the population without depleting the population into the future. And so to understand what sustainable is, we need to know how many animals are being removed from the population during every hunting season. And we do that through sending out surveys. And from those surveys, we can get an estimate of harvest. We pass it along to our biologists, and they use that information in conjunction with other data that they collect to make decisions about how much and where do they put harvest in the future in future hunting seasons.
Chad, do we send out surveys for all game animals in North Dakota?
Yeah, we pretty much do it all, and we do it really rigorously. I think we sent out 75,000 surveys last year between the initial surveys that go out, and then we also send up follow-up reminders to the hunters that haven't returned a survey. And so we work really hard to collect good information on harvest because it's an essential piece of information for biologists to use to make decisions about managing wildlife and fisheries. And so I think right now I've got 4 surveys out. We have youth seasons for our pheasant, our waterfowl, and our deer. And we're just wrapping up an early Canada goose survey that'll be completed pretty shortly. And then looking forward, we have all of our big game surveys, so all of the deer, pronghorn, elk, moose. We have fall turkey coming up, and in spring it kind of slows down a bit, which is nice. And so during the spring we have fur bear and our spring turkey surveys. And so there's not a shortage of things to do late fall and early winter. We send out a lot of surveys.
They don't take very long to fill out. What are some of the questions that you're asking on these surveys?
Yeah, it's a good point because we're sensitive to hunters' time and we don't want to inundate them with questions. And so there's really a couple of key things we need to know. The first piece of information we're looking for is where did you hunt and how many days did you spend hunting there? The second piece of information that we need is were you successful? And if you were successful, how many of that game species did you harvest, if that's applicable? And then third, again, if it's applicable, we want to know a little bit about the animal's biology, so its sex and its age.
Sure. So it's very important to fill these out accurately.
Yeah, it's really vital that hunters are working diligently to complete their surveys as accurately as possible. And there's this saying that every wildlife student comes across when they're going to school, and it's garbage in, garbage out. And that means exactly what you'd think it mean. I mean, the estimates of harvest that we produce are only going to be as good as the responses on the surveys that we get back from hunters. And so if there are errors on those responses, then we're going to have more variability around our estimates of harvest and more variability around our estimates of hunting effort. And that just adds to uncertainty in the process of trying to determine, how many permits do we allocate in future hunting seasons.
So if you go out deer hunting or pheasant hunting and you don't harvest any animals, should you still fill out your survey?
Yeah, absolutely. The information that we get from unsuccessful hunters, the zeros that they would report on their survey is just as important as the information we get from successful hunters. And so, I understand it can be frustrated to miss your deer or just have a lackluster season, but we really rely on the information that we get from unsuccessful hunters as well. And so I encourage hunters to fill their surveys out as accurately as possible and return them to us even if they were unsuccessful.
Sure. How do you determine, Chad, on who gets these surveys in the mail?
It kind of depends on the game species and the season. So in general, most of our surveys we send out, and we identify a random selection of hunters, and we'll send out surveys for them to complete and return. But for some of our smaller harvests, we will, for example, for like our muzzleloader deer season that's coming up or the pronghorn season that's coming up, there are usually fewer than 1,000 hunters, and it's relatively straightforward to just send all of those individuals a survey, and that ensures that we get enough surveys back to produce good estimates of harvest. And then we also have, for some of our special big game, we'll send everybody a survey, and we work really hard to make sure that all of those hunters return their surveys, because there's just a lot more riding on some of those seasons and some of those harvests.
We've been doing surveys in North Dakota for a long, long time. This isn't something new.
Yeah, we really have this rich tradition of sending out and getting good information from our hunters. So for example, the deer gun survey, we've been sending out the same consistent paper survey since 1975, and that length of a time series is really kind of unheard of. And so what some of these long time series or these big data sets allow us to do is to kind of really put into perspective some of the short-term trends that we might see. And so, we may see a short-term decline or a short-term increase in a wildlife population, and we can say, well, is this significant? I don't know. It's only over a 2-year period, so let's look back at the past 40 years and kind of put those changes in population across time into perspective.
Sure. Any new innovative ways that we're going to be sending surveys out here in the future?
Yeah, we have some things coming up that I'm pretty excited about. So one of the things that the department is looking into doing is figuring out how do we send out our surveys electronically. And by electronically, I mean we're going to send out the same paper survey that you'd typically get in the mail, but it's going to be over your smartphone or on your computer. And the idea behind that is that if it's easier for you to complete the survey online, then you're going to be more likely to return those surveys, and we'll get more of them back, and we can produce better estimates of harvest that we can pass along to our biologists. And there's some other kind of benefits to completing surveys electronically in that it's typically a little bit more affordable to send surveys out online, and then we can get the responses back from hunters instantaneously because we have access to them as soon as they hit submit and send the survey on. And so yeah, we're starting to we'll start working on those later this fall, and over the next couple of years we're going to try and work out the issues with electronic surveys and figure out how do we incorporate, not replace paper surveys, but just supplement some of our paper surveys with electronic surveys. And so if you're one of those individuals that receives an email from us, we're not trying to send you junk mail. We actually do want you to complete a survey. And it's also possible that they may get a special paper survey that has a link for them to complete their survey online. So if they get one of those, I encourage hunters to fill them out and help us out.
Thanks for joining me today. A lot of good information. Thanks, Chad. As Chad just mentioned, if you do get a survey in the mail, please take the time to fill out the survey. It just takes a little bit of time, and that information is very crucial for wildlife management in North Dakota. Even if you don't harvest anything, still fill out the survey because that information is important also. For Chad Parent and the rest of the staff here at the Game and Fish Department, thanks for joining us for this week's Outdoors Online. We'll see you again next week.